Hello again. This video lecture is on speaking to persuade, with particular attention to preparing for your speech 3, your speech to persuade. So the first thing I want to do is kind of go over the assignment for speech 3. Please make sure you've read the assignment sheet so you're kind of familiar with these concepts. For your third graded oral and written presentation, you're going to present and defend a solution that would solve a problem that exists in society today. So our persuasive speeches are going to be about a call to action. You want your audience to support a mandatory and enforceable policy that will fix some kind of problem that is occurring in the status quo. You're first going to describe the problem. Then you're going to explain why the problem continues and finally offer a mandatory and enforceable solution that would change the status quo in some way, shape, or form. So the first thing you want to consider is what is the problem? What's wrong with the status quo? So pick something that's going on with the status quo. I have a list of topic suggestions on the assignment sheet that are really about focusing on something that's wrong with the status quo. The first thing you want to do is make sure we localize the problem. Any problem you pick that is wrong with the status quo, be sure that it's something that is local. By local, excuse me, we mean within the realm of your audience's experience. The most local you can get is Clark College, but more likely the city of Vancouver, or the county, or the furthest out, probably the state. You might consider that a topic is only local at the national level. It's something that can only be fixed at the national level. Like, for example, fixing the Electoral College can only be done at a federal level. But keep in mind, the further out that I have to go to participate in this policy, if I have to go to the United States Congress to help get, this policy passed, I'm likely as an audience member going to say, that's not going to happen. I mean, the likelihood I can convince the U.S. Congress to take action. But maybe I can convince the student government at Clark College to make a change in policy at Clark College, or I can go to the city council and get somebody to do something at the Vancouver level. Now that feels more within my realm of possibility. So I oftentimes will ask you, please localize your problems as much as possible. It should also impact your audience in some way, shape, or form. This is a problem that should impact your audience. They should be affected by it either directly. Your audience, absolutely, each one of them is impacted by it, or they're indirectly affected. Somebody they love or care about, or their future kids are going to be impacted by this. Or they're contributing to the problem. They're actually a part of the problem, and they need to look inside and change their own behavior. This also needs to be a problem that can be solved with a clear, mandatory, and enforceable policy. So we're not talking about, I want to encourage my audience to vote. That's not mandatory and enforceable. But if I create a national or a state holiday, like I'm going to make Election Day a holiday where everybody gets the day off, now that's a policy that can be mandated and enforced. Speaking of the policy, what can be done to fix the status quo? You need to offer some kind of policy that is mandatory and enforceable. This needs to be a rule or a regulation, something new. Maybe you're going to add a new rule, maybe add a new regulation. You could improve an existing rule. Maybe a rule that exists right now isn't strong enough. The penalty isn't strong enough. It's not being enforced. It doesn't affect enough people. Or I might remove a regulation or a rule. I might get rid of a regulation that's actually keeping the problem going. So you have a lot of options here. These are the things that you want to start thinking about. So the first thing I want to do is kind of take us through the structure of your speech. As with every speech that we've done so far, don't forget your introduction. The introduction is basically the same as your informative speech. You're going to have an attention getter that uses one of those strategies that we've talked about. Then you're going to have a thesis. Your thesis is actually going to be the policy that you hope to implement. So your thesis statement would be something like, today I hope to persuade you to endorse a policy to increase the penalties for driving while talking on a cell phone. Then a statement of significance. Why is this topic important? How's it relevant to your audience? And then a statement of credibility. Why are you credible to talk about this? And then a preview. And you're going to preview three main points: the problem, the cause, and then your solution. So I first want to talk about the problem step. Here, you're going to establish the problem that needs to be solved. In other words, what is wrong with the status quo that you need to fix? So the first thing you need to express is, what is the problem? You want to talk about, is it that we have too many car accidents with people driving on cell phones, driving while talking on a cell phone? One of the issues that's coming up is pollution of our streams. People are pouring pollutants down our sewer drains, and they're leaking into our streams. The other problem is congestion on I-5. The I-5 corridor going south into Portland and north into Washington at the end of the day has gotten so bad that people are sitting in traffic for hours and hours, so that's a problem. So those are three kind of problems with the status quo that you might start talking about. The first is, where does it exist? And again, this is where we localize. Can you show where this problem is happening right here directly in our own community? Or if it's not in our community, is it a state issue? Is it something the state has to step in and fix? So I'm always going to ask you, make sure you can localize this problem as much as possible. Then give some details about the problem. Who's contributing to the problem? What is the problem? How is the problem happening? If I were talking about pollution in our streams, for example, I would say that people are pouring, paint and oil and other kind of pollutants down our sewerways, and they're leaking into our streams. Or congestion on the I-5. The fact that we have not replaced that bridge. We've not expanded the infrastructure for, the better part of 100 years, yet our population has grown exponentially. Here's where I'm going to cite some sources and give some statistics. When did the problem start? It's important that your audience knows whether this is a brand new problem. If it's a brand new problem, you're in the perfect position to educate them. But if it's an old problem, people have heard about the congestion on I-5 for years. They're not likely to be very motivated unless you can reframe that problem and show them that, yeah, this is an old problem, but I've got some new stuff to give you that's going to make you realize that this problem is actually, much worse today than it's ever been, and we need to fix it. Who's impacted by the problem? Again, how is your audience impacted? If it's traffic on the I-5, is it contributing to whether or not they're going to be late for work? How long they sit in their car? How much gas they use? If it's the pollution in the streams, are they eating fish? Are they drinking water groundwater that might be polluted by what's happening in our environment? Are their loved ones impacted? What about your future family? What are the consequences of not solving this problem? What will happen if we don't fix this problem right now? And there are a bunch of different consequences you can talk about. Are there environmental consequences? If we don't build a new I-5 bridge and lessen that congestion, we're seeing more air pollution. Air pollution means more asthma. Your children are at risk for more asthma. Or are there social consequences? If we're not fixing talking while on a cell phone and driving, this is going to have social implications. It's going to make people more leery of getting on the roads or interacting with people. Are there political consequences? If we're not changing our electoral system in the state of Washington, are we going to lose voters? Are people going to stop going to the polls? Are there economic? Are our taxes going to go up? Is this going to cost me more money? If we continue to pollute our streams, is it going to cost money for repairing of the sewer systems or fixing our contaminated groundwater? Are there health consequences? Is our drinking water going to be poisoned? Is all this air pollution from the increased pollution from the I-5 traffic congestion going in and out of Portland? And are there safety concerns? Are our roads getting worse? Or is our water getting more contaminated? Is crime going up as a result of this? Please make sure you're citing complete sources throughout the entire point. Remember, this is not just your own opinion. Persuasion is not about expressing your opinion. You can express your opinion all you want. You've just got to back it up with evidence and sources. And make sure that you're using relevant statistics and examples to support the existence of the problem. So your first main point is, what's the problem? Lay that all out. This will likely be one of the longest parts of your speech. Please go back to the assignment sheet and look at the sample persuasive outline that I put in the module, and look at the sample persuasive speeches that will be on the Panopto page. The next point you're going to talk about are the causes. Here, you need to establish why the problem continues. So here's the problem. What is keeping the problem from going away? What's keeping that problem from being fixed? And this is what your policy is going to fix. Your policy is going to fix the causes. So there are a bunch of what I like to call stock causes that underlie almost every problem. Pick one or two of these that you can focus on that will, you'll be able to create a policy that will fix them. And so let me give you some examples of what I mean by this. One of the biggest reasons that a problem continues is we don't have enough money to fix it. You can talk about the problem with our educational system in the state of Washington, and I can tell you the root cause of that is we lack money. We don't have enough money to pay teachers, to fix our schools. The fact that we haven't replaced the I-5 bridge comes down to money. Nobody wants to pay for it. So is there a money problem? And a couple of things. Does that money problem exist because we have a budget shortfall? Are there not enough taxes going in? Is there a mismanagement of funds? These are all things that you could fix with your policy. Or do we lack education? Maybe we're not educating about this issue. I'll give you a good example. One of the biggest problems in our financial sector right now is credit card debt and student loan debt. In fact, the fastest growing segment of our population to file for bankruptcy are people under the age of 30. And part of that's because they've accrued so much credit card and student loan debt that they don't know what to do. And a lot of people will look at this and say, the root cause is we lack education. We don't educate our students on how to manage their personal finances. Very few people have to take a personal finance class to graduate from high school. So we lack education. We lack education about environmental issues and politics. We have low voter turnout. Part of that is because we've taken civics education out of our schools. People don't have to take civics anymore, so they don't really learn about the power and value of being a voter. So are we not teaching this in schools? Is this not a required subject? And again, your policy then could be, let's make this a mandatory subject in Vancouver Public Schools. Do we lack awareness? It's not just education, but are we not making people aware? One of the things that we had to do when the coronavirus began was educate and make people aware. People had to be aware of how coronavirus spread, why we were closing down public spaces. And that was done through the media and public service announcements. We had to make people aware of how dangerous it was to talk on a cell phone while driving. We've had to make people aware of, how to dispose of oil and paint by not throwing it in the trash. All of that came from like the media, educating, maybe sending out flyers and pamphlets. So are citizens not being told of your problem? Is there no media? Perfect opportunity for you to create a policy that says, let's create a new policy that makes people aware of this problem, that actually forces the media to report on it. Do we lack regulations? Are there regulations? Is this problem existing because we don't have laws to regulate it? A really good example of this is when cell phone technology first started becoming popular, we had no rules to govern whether or not people could drive while talking on a cell phone. People just did it because there were no laws. We hadn't caught up yet. And as a result, we had all kinds of accidents. Pedestrians were getting hit. There were just a ton of car accidents being happened because people were talking on cell phones. New York City then became the first city in the country to pass laws saying you cannot talk on a cell phone while driving. And people were appalled, saying, oh, this is an invasion of our civil rights. But then as accidents decreased and pedestrians became safer, almost every other state and city in the country now has followed those laws. Cyberbullying is a great example. When social media became popular, we didn't have any rules about whether or not you could post things online that were considered bullying. Now we're racing to pass laws that make cyberbullying illegal or penalties for that. So maybe your problem exists because we don't have any laws that would stop the problem from continuing. Your policy then can be, hey, let's create this new law. Think about before 9/11. Before 9/11 happened, you could take, a box cutter on a plane, you could take water on a plane. Now, after 9/11, we have passed new regulations to prevent another act of terrorism from happening. So that's a great example. Or are the regulations not enough? I'll go back to our cell phone example. When we passed laws banning talking on a cell phone while driving, those laws were what were considered a secondary offense. You couldn't be pulled over for talking on a cell phone. You had to be doing something else to get pulled over for before they could ticket you for talking on a cell phone. It's called a secondary offense. And people didn't care, people were still talking on cell phones. We then moved to increase the penalties. Then we changed it from secondary to primary, and we actually increased the penalties in the laws as a way to kind of, rein this problem in. So are the penalties not strong enough? Are they too lenient? Are we not enforcing them? Your policy then can be, let's strengthen those. Let's make those penalties stronger. Let's actually enforce these laws in ways that we haven't done it before. Is the system broken? Do we have a system in place, but it's not being enforced? A good example of this, we talk about illegal immigration. We talk about people who are here without proper papers. It's not that we have made it so that people can be here without papers and can be here illegally. We have laws. The problem is we're not enforcing them. Employers are still hiring people and not checking to see whether or not they're citizens. We have border security that's lax in some places. So it's not that we don't have regulations. It's not that the regulations aren't in place. It's that somehow the system is broken and those penalties aren't being enforced. So are the laws not being enforced? Have they been corrupted? This is a great example then of where your policy can fix the system. You don't have to pass a new law, you just have to fix the system so that the existing laws can be enforced. And last is probably just one of the most difficult, and that is, are we just apathetic and we don't care? Do we have laws in place, but people just aren't following them? Or we have a problem in place, people know about the problem, but they just don't care. A great example of this is recycling. We've been taught to recycle for the better part of 60 years, yet we still can't break 30% recycling rates in this country, which means 70% of what we could recycle is still being thrown in the trash. Is it because nobody knows you're supposed to recycle? Of course not. We just don't care. We're apathetic. How do you fix apathy? How do you fix people that don't care? Well, you can, make things mandatory. I could make recycling mandatory. That would, fix apathy, right? If you're going to get fined or hurt financially because you don't recycle, then that's going to fix your apathy. So there, again, is a good policy that you could put into place. So these are the causes. Causes are the reasons why your problem continues, and they're the thing that your policy is going to target. Again, go back to the assignment sheet, the sample outline, and watch the sample videos to see how those cause steps get laid out. You do need sources for this. Don't just throw causes out without any sort of source for it, or you're not going to get the best grade possible. So the last thing we want to talk about in terms of your speech 3 is your policy. Here you want to explain the specific policy that you're going to implement to fix the causes. Please use full sentences and use proper outline format. Again, go back to the assignment sheet. But the first thing you're going to do is, what is the policy that you're proposing to fix this problem? Explain it. I'm going to increase the penalties. I'm going to pass a new law. I'm going to remove a law. I'm going to increase funding for this particular issue. Explain the specific policy, talk about how it will work, give really good, clear details. Who will implement and enforce the policy? Remember, a policy is a solution that is mandatory and enforceable. So, for example, if I were to talk about the I-5 bridge, I'm going to talk about congestion on I-5. I've talked about my whole problem in the problem step. Traffic is up. People can't get into Portland. There's all kinds of pollution. The causes are that we don't have enough money to replace the bridge. Nobody wants to pay for it. So my policy is we're going to replace the I-5 bridge. We're going to do this by imposing a toll on the I-5 bridge that's going to raise X number of dollars to rebuild the bridge. We're going to do this over the span of about 10 years. I'm going to explain how much that toll is going to be. The state of Washington and the state of Oregon are going to split the toll and split the cost, and it will be done in the next 3 or 4 years. Or let's say I want to fix recycling. I talk about in my problem step, recycling is continuing and it's polluting, and we have all of these issues with our groundwater and contamination of our environment. I'm going to talk about the cause. The cause is we don't have regulations in place and people are apathetic. So my policy is the city of Vancouver is going to mandate recycling. We're going to enforce that. We're going to say you must recycle. If garbage collectors find something in your garbage that should be recycled, you're going to get a fine for it. This is going to be enforced by the city of Vancouver. It's going to be implemented by the waste management garbage collectors. They're going to monitor this, and if you are caught not recycling, you're going to get fined for that. So I'm going to make that policy very clear. I'm going to explain that. Then I'm going to talk about how the solution solves the problem. And I'm going to talk about the fact that once I make recycling mandatory, people are going to start recycling. And the more recycling that happens, the less stuff is going to go into our landfills, the less contamination of our streams and groundwater. Does it fix the causes? Does it make people less apathetic? Absolutely. If I'm going to get fined for not recycling, I'm going to care about recycling. Does it add money? Does it add a policy? Does it make people care? If I go back to my I-5 bridge, it solves the problem because we're going to build a bigger bridge that's going to lessen the congestion on I-5. It's going to reduce air pollution. It's going to reduce the amount of time that people have to stay in traffic, which makes people happier and much more productive in their jobs. Then give us an example of where your policy or one similar has worked before. One of the ways that your audience can say, wait a minute, you're going to mandate recycling? Gosh, that does not seem like it's a very realistic policy. Well, give me an example of where that's worked before. And I'm going to give you an example of a city in New Jersey. This is actually true, who had huge issues with recycling. Nobody would recycle. So they did make recycling mandatory. They empowered their garbage collectors to go through garbage. And if they found anything that could be recycled, they got ticketed for that. And every time you got a ticket, if it was the second time or third time you got a ticket, the fine went up. What do you think happened? Recycling rates went up. People started recycling, Or I might find an example of a place in another state where they built a bridge. They passed tolls and built a new bridge. And as a result, traffic congestion dropped, accident rates dropped. So I want to provide that example. Make sure you give evidence of that. Make sure you have sources for that. I talked about financial literacy classes, personal finance classes. Let's say you couldn't find any examples of where other states have passed personal finance classes, but you still want an example of how this policy might work. I might say, well, look, let's talk about sex education. For a long time, teen pregnancy rates were on the incline and STD rates. We then implemented comprehensive sex education in our schools. We started teaching about sex in our schools. As a result, we have the lowest teen pregnancy rates today than we've had in 30 years. And that's true. The result is we educated about sex and we changed sexual behavior to the point where kids were becoming and teens were becoming more responsible about sex, lowering the teen pregnancy rates. if we can educate about sex, we can probably educate about finances and have the same kind of, change in our financial issues. So there's always an example or an analogy that you can use. Again, make sure you are using sources for this. Show that this has worked in another city. It can work in another state, another country. Then you're going to offer at least one counter argument. This goes to the stuff your text talks about. We're going to get into here in a minute when we start talking about chapter 16, and that is refutation. So one of the things you want to anticipate is your audience is going to say, well, gosh, won't this cost too much money? Won't people rebel? Won't people, not follow these new regulations? So you're going to offer at least one counter argument to your solution and then refute it. So I might say, well, gee, won't it cost a lot of money to empower our recycling, our garbage collectors to go through garbage cans? It's going to slow down the process of actually, collecting our garbage. And then you want to refute that. You want to say, well, one of the things that happens is every time we find recycling in our garbage cans, they're going to get fined. That, money is going to go toward, improvements in our recycling process. So we're actually going to, find a balance in that. Or, won't people, if we put a toll on the I-5 bridge, won't people just go to the 205 bridge and use that? And it'll actually make the 205 traffic even greater. And I might say, well, most of the models for tolling the I-5 bridge also toll the 205 bridge, so it splits the difference. So I always want to acknowledge that there is a reason people might not support my policy, but then I always want to refute it. Again, use sources for this. This isn't just your own opinion. You've got to back this up with evidence and sources. Then how can your audience get involved in getting your proposed policy implemented? Who can they contact? Who can they write? Can they write a government official? Can they sign a petition online? So again, go back to the assignment sheet and look how all of these things are laid out. This is a 3 main point process. What's the problem? What's the cause? What is a mandatory and enforceable solution that I can use? There is a persuasive speech proposal assignment on the module that you'll need to turn that in, and I'll be asking you all of these questions. Please don't move forward on an outline until you've gotten that proposal approved by me. So, okay, so that is our tutorial and the lecture for speech number 3. I'm going to have a separate video here to talk about persuasive speaking, and I'll make that a separate video. So until then, thanks for listening. Again, if you have any questions or anything, as always, feel free to email me and contact me. And I'll see you in the next video.